It was approaching the end of summer, and my wife and I wanted to go on a camping trip before it started getting cool down again. I had a ton of camping gear and leftover from when I used to go with college buddies, and wanted to put it back to use. There was one spot we always used to go. It wasn't even technically a camping ground, just a cool spot we had found. One time then, I thought would be perfect to take my wife. When we got there, we noticed a makeshift fire pit and some trash left behind. So obviously other people had found the spot, like we didn't really care. We set up the tent we'd be staying in and started a fire. We sat around the fire talking and drinking for hours on end. Suddenly, at around 2 a.m., we were interrupted by the sound of a chainsaw starting and revving up. Or at least, that's exactly what it sounded like. Our first thought was that someone was cutting down a tree. But we didn't understand why someone would be doing that this late in the night. This theory was quickly thrown out when this maniacal laughing suddenly followed. Now we were creeped out. We put out the firing, got inside. Our tent sounded distant, so we felt somewhat safe. Plus, we had a machete if it really came to that. Over the next few minutes, it honestly sounded like the noises were getting closer. But thankfully the engine, or whatever it was, abruptly cut out, and a wave of relief overcame us. After a half hour of silence, the two of us felt comfortable enough to try and fall asleep. And surprisingly, we actually did relatively quickly, most likely in part due to the drinks we had earlier. I don't know what time it was, but at some point during the night, I remember opening my eyes, confused as to what woke me up. As my senses were coming back to me, the sound of footsteps fill my ears. I stand up to listen better, and noticed my wife had already done the same, sat there, looking at each other, listening. There were multiple sets of footsteps. It sounded like no more than 20 yards away. My wife suggested we make a run for the car. I told her we should wait a few minutes. It was light out that night from the moon, and behind her, I could see the silhouettes of 3 men on the tent wall. I didn't tell her this. The last thing I wanted to do was scare her. But I did get a firm grip on the machete laying next to us. Although I was horrified at the thought of actually having to use it on someone right there, watching the shadows, seconds felt like hours. Finally, after what was realistically only a couple minutes, I saw them walk off. This was our chance. I told my wife it was time to go, leaving everything behind. I opened the tent and we fall and sprinted to the car. I've never been more thankful to have a remote star key fob. I started the engine as we were running, and right as we got inside, I floored it out of there. That's when I told my wife about the shadows on the tin wall, and she laid into me for not telling her earlier. We spent the night in a hotel. The next morning we went back to the camp. All of our stuff was gone. Not a single thing was left behind. I still don't know what really went down that night. Part of me thinks we were just unknowingly on someone else's private property, and that was their sick way of getting us off of it.